It's good to be with you again today. If you would turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 5, of course, you're familiar that this is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, but there's one particular passage that I would like to point out and share with you this morning. It is Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. And in this passage, where Jesus is talking about our being the light of the world, here he says that we are the salt of the earth. And Jesus calls us salt. And in so doing, reminds us that we have the opportunity and the responsibility to be an influence in the world. What do we know about salt? I know that animals seek it out. Uh, Sheep, cows, horses, all appreciate when the farmer puts out a salt lick, and they will always go to that because it's taste and they need it. It's interesting that trade routes always included a source of salt. It was a critical part of their trade. It was a very valuable commodity. And so the Dead Sea was an excellent place to fill up your bags, load your camels down with salt, and use that for barter as they went around trading. It's interesting that Roman soldiers were paid in salt. It was a universal medium of exchange in the Roman Empire. It was a very trustworthy standard. In fact, our word salary comes from the Greek word for salt. When you think about our physical bodies, even, we must always have a precise amount of salt in our bodies. Uh, to deviate from that would surely result in sickness or even death. Salt is used worldwide as the number one condiment. And of course, it enhances the taste of food. It is universally desired and universally appreciated. But let's look at salt as it is used in the Bible. First, salt is a symbol of a binding covenant. In Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13, Moses wrote, "You shall season all your grain offerings with salt. You shall not let the salt of the covenant with your God be missing from your grain offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt." And so salt made a covenant binding, covenant between us and God. Salt was also a healing and a cleansing aid. In 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 20 and 21, we have a situation here that men came to Elisha and said that his spring's water was bad. So Elisha threw salt in that water and made the bad spring good. For healing and cleansing, it's recorded that no one who drank the waters of that spring would ever encounter death or even a miscarriage. Job in chapter 6, verse 6 said that salt makes even tasteless food edible, so it helps the appetite. Salt, of course, represents influence. When Jesus said, "You're the light of the world, you're the salt of the earth, men will see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." It is a figurative word for influence, good influence. Paul in Colossians chapter 4 verse 6 equated salt with gracious speech. And he says in here, "Let your speech be seasoned with salt." And then in Mark chapter 9 verse 50, Jesus talked about having salt in ourselves, and as a result, peace would come. Have salt in yourselves, be at peace with one another. You know, we are called salt for several reasons. One is the quality of salt, and the quality that we need to have in us is the ability to preserve. In Acts chapter 2, verses 40 and 41, we are told that as a result of the preaching of Peter and the other apostles, that those who received their word were baptized, and they were added that day about 3,000 to the church, those who are being saved. And so this quality that we have in us, this quality of influence and gracious speech and that which brings peace, has that ability to preserve. Salt is spoken of as a quality that we have because of the influence that we have on others to be pure. Isn't it interesting that in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 4, when God is talking about how he found Israel and spoke of her as a newborn baby, spoke of washing the baby with salt. Salt not only cleanses their bodies, but it gives firmness to their skins. That's what was done in ancient times. Uh, the world, of course, when we think of why we are called salt, the world acts differently around Christians. In Romans chapter 12, verse 2, Paul speaks of our having a purifying influence on the world around us. You know, the world just acts differently when a Christian is among them. The third reason we are called salt is because of our pleasant nature. It's interesting that when Paul wrote to the Philippians, he said that Christians flavor the world around them. They make it taste like Jesus. Isn't that fascinating? They make it taste like Jesus. Of course, there are situations where salt might not always be what is wanted. It can lose its quality. Jesus spoke of the salt at the bottom of the bag or the bottom of the barrel. And this is, of course, salt is a chemical compound, NaCl, sodium chloride. But the salt that was used in the ancient world was either mined from the salt cliffs along the Dead Sea. Those salt cliffs were 7 miles long, several hundred feet high. Salt also could have been evaporated from the waters of the Dead Sea, but either way, it was always mixed with minerals or vegetable matter. And when the cook, when the owner of this salt got to the bottom of the bag or the barrel, those impure ingredients had fallen to the bottom, and the salt then lost its ability to season. It lost its ability to preserve. It lost its taste. And Jesus said it's not good for anything but except to be thrown out along the wayside where where people walk. It's just not good anymore. Christians then, of course, can lose their saltiness. This happens when we allow ourselves to be influenced negatively by our contact with the world. When we get to be more like the world than we are like the Lord, then we have lost that which sets us apart. We have lost that which makes us valuable to the Lord's purposes. And this happens when we allow ourselves to become a blend of Christian and elements from the world. Of course, again, in ancient times, when salt lost its ability to season and preserve, it was taken out. It was used for paving materials. Uh, we ourselves, if we lose that salt within ourselves, then we do not have that preserving, saving, influencing ability, and we are of no use to Christ or the church or one another. Christians then can become saltless people. We must become salted souls. We must cultivate a strong influence for Christ in the world that is around us. We must think about what we say and what we do. Uh, Otherwise, the Lord will consider us without flavor and he will cast us out. We are the salt of the earth. We are the salt of the earth. And because of that, we have that ability to preserve. We have that influence on others. And we have a nature about us that draws people in. You be the salt of the earth. Thank you for listening. God bless.